Hey Wargamers, welcome back to the channel, Death from Above Wargaming. I'm Aaron, coming back at you with part 4 of our tutorial on how to play BattleTech Override. So first we did a little high-level overview, anatomy of the card. Then we did a video on initiative and movement. Then we did a pretty hefty dive into combat, dealing damage, damage resolution, critical hits, the various weapon types. Had a little sneak peek at the card builder in that one. And now tonight, part 4 is going to be about piloting skill checks, heat, and the end phase. And I'm going to add a little extra in there about heat weapons like flamers, things along those lines. So we'll get to look at all that good stuff tonight. Now, all right, so let me bring up the rules reference again. This is free to download on our website. You can get it over there. This is just a document that kind of guides you through and spotlights some of the key stuff from MechWarrior Destiny that we sort of pulled together. Again, MechWarrior Destiny, great core, but a very thin slice of what you actually need for the tabletop. So this document, and a lot of the stuff that we did, it sort of fills in that white space and connects the dots for you. All right, let's talk about piloting. So an important thing about classic BattleTech versus Alpha Strike is classic features both piloting and gunnery skills. Mechs can fall over. They can crawl around. They can do all sorts of things that you cannot do in Alpha Strike because there's no piloting skill. In MechWarrior Destiny and thus in BattleTech Override, piloting is a very important part of the game. Taking damage and getting knocked off your feet, all of these things happen in BattleTech Override. So let's talk about that and dive into it. So piloting skill rolls in general. So this is a 2d6 check. It's based on your piloting skill, and it's made to maintain control of the mech, or in the case of non-mechs, vehicle. And it's situational. Piloting skill rolls are always made at the end of the phase that the sort of the trigger occurs, if you will. So we'll call them sort of like triggers, like situations that trigger a piloting skill roll. There are basically 4 main categories when PSRs, or piloting skill rolls, I'm going to call them PSRs, when they occur in Override. Number 1 is excessive damage, right? So when you take an excessive amount of damage, and that's 7 points or more, you have to make a piloting skill roll. For every full 7 points of damage that you take, it's a +1 penalty. So if I take, 7 points of damage to 13 points of damage, it's a +1. If I take 14 points of damage, it goes to a +2. For every 7 full points of damage, it's +1 to your roll. And again, +1 is bad. It makes the roll harder to make. The second scenario is when TMM is reduced from a critical hit or leg destruction, not from heat. But if you take an actuator hit or your leg's blown off, you're going to have to make a piloting skill roll. The third one is when your gyro is hit. So whether it's damaged or destroyed, that's going to trigger a check. And then damage from a physical attack, kick, charge, ram, DFA. The only thing that doesn't trigger one is a punch. I think it's important to note that you can damage yourself in a DFA, in a charge, and in a ram. You're going to take damage on those, and so when you execute those attacks, you will be subject to making a PSR. Sometimes if you miss a DFA, which happens more often than not, you automatically fail your piloting skill roll. So that's a thing. Like, automatic failure of piloting skill rolls is a thing. In the circumstances, and you'll see that down here, right? The circumstances when a PSR fails automatically is the following: if you're immobilized, if you're shut down, if you're unconscious, right? So the pilot or crew's unconscious, if your gyro is totally destroyed, if your leg is destroyed, and again, we just talked about this, missing a DFA. These are situations, these are circumstances where your PSR fails automatically. All right. So if you take excessive damage, right? I take 14 points of damage. That's going to trigger a PSR, and I'm shut down. I automatically fall over, right? I automatically fail that PSR. That's how that works. All right. So how do we make a PSR? It's pretty simple. You make one PSR per at the end of the phase. So with all the modifiers, all right. So if in the shooting phase I take a leg actuator hit and I take 14 points of damage, and I get to take a gyro hit and blah blah blah, right? All of those things are added in, and I have to make one check. All right. I either pass it or I fail it. All right. So there's one roll, but all the modifiers are stacked in there. So that's how that works. All right. So the important thing to notice is like piloting skill. I think I said this I'm sorry, I'm stalling. I think I said this in the first one. Lower skill is better. If you're unfamiliar with BattleTech, it's important to note lower skill is better. So a lower piloting skill of 0 is way better than a piloting skill of 7. So you take your piloting skill, you add in all those modifiers, right? That is your TN, your target number. If you roll equal to or above that number, you've succeeded in your piloting skill roll. You maintain control, the mech doesn't fall over. If you fail, a couple things happen. First thing, you need to check to see if the pilot or the crew took damage, right? So as that thing's crashing to the people jokingly call this the seatbelt check. As that thing is crashing to the ground, right, you need to make a second 2d6 roll. It's the same exact target number from your prior piloting skill roll check. If you succeed, your pilot's fine. If you fail, they mark off a box of damage. We'll talk about pilot damage in just a minute. When you take pilot damage, again, we'll talk about this in a little bit. When you take pilot damage, you do need to make a consciousness check, which is a fun thing. We'll talk about that when we get to the end phase, though. All right. The second thing that happens, so first thing is you make that seatbelt check. The second thing is the unit falls down and takes damage. All right. Damage is based on size. It's the mech's punch damage. It's listed on their card. It's a single group of damage that goes to a location. You roll 2d6, or if you want your opponent to roll it, that's fine. It's never the rear. It's always in the front armor. So if you roll torso, it's never the rear torso. All right, it can hit their head. It can hit anywhere. Bad things can happen when you fall. When you are falling down, when you have fallen down, I should say, a couple of things to remember. You can opt to stand up in the following movement phase. We talked about this in the movement video. It costs 2 inches. You just get back up, as long as you have 2 legs. In the case of a bipedal mech. There are quad mech rules, by the way, which I'm not going to go over in this tutorial, but they are in the back. There's an appendix in the rules reference. One of our patrons actually pulled that together and helped huge with that. So awesome stuff in there. I bring that up because quads can actually lose more than 1 leg and still get back up because they're weird. All right, the other thing to remember is that typically PSRs are triggered in the combat phase in Override. If there's like weird weather or deep mud or like whatever, sometimes it happens in the movement phase. Most of the time, it's going to be in the combat phase, and so they can't get back up until the following turn. If you fall in the movement phase, though, you can spend movement to get back up in the movement phase. But again, like you fall, like that would only happen in a scenario where there's like special like terrain rules where you have to make a PSR like right then and there in the movement. Like I enter this like area of mud and I need to make a PSR roll to see if I slip. 99% of the time, you're going to get knocked over in the combat phase, so then you won't be able to get back up until the following turn. And also keep in mind, even though they can get back up, their TMM is going to be reduced, and so they're going to be easier to hit, contain, and so on. So that's basically piloting skill rolls in a nutshell. It's very straightforward. All of the stuff is right here in this quick reference, this little table. And that's that. All right. So let's talk real quick about heat. Let's get into heat. All right. So heat is a thing that is unique to battle mechs and fighters. Vehicles do not build up heat. That's because if you want to get deep into the why, basically when you build a vehicle and you construct a vehicle and in tech manual, all the rules are there. You have to always have a number of heat sinks equal to the heat that the vehicle can generate, so they never generate heat. Mechs and aerospace fighters can be pushed, right? Heat represents basically their ability to push their reactor, to overcharge, if you will, to fire more weapons or use jump jets or deal with outside external heat factors, all right? I want to bring up this card just to kind of refresh us. Every tick has a heat value, right? That's HT, heat value. When you fire a tick, it builds up that much heat. Whether you hit or miss, doesn't matter. There are some exceptions to that, but again, the rule is heat, you fire it, you build it up. Sinks up here then reduce the heat. All right. So if I'm this Warhammer and I fire 2 PPCs and my medium lasers, I build up 5 points of heat. I would reduce it by 4. I build up 1 point of heat. I take 1 point, and then the following turn, I have -2 to my ground move, -1 to my TMM. It says ground move because it doesn't actually reduce your jump move if you jump. Only your ground movement. So your sprint and then your basically your walk and your sprint is modified. So it is important to note that your movement goes from 4 to 2. Your sprint does not go from 6 to 4. Your sprint is recalculated based on your movement value. It's 1.5 times rounded up. So if my base move is 2, then my new sprint would be 3. That's basically how that works. Let's say I build up, let's say I decide I'm going to fire both PPCs, my medium lasers, and my SRM6. So I build up 2 points of heat, right? Because again, 2, 4, 5, 6, I reduce it by 4, I build up 2 points of heat. Let's say the following turn, all I do is I just decide I'm only going to fire my medium lasers and my SRM. So I build up 2 points of heat, my sinks are 4. I'm basically can then reduce 2 points of heat off the scale because I have 2 sinks left over. I'm essentially at like a net +2 on my sinks, so I can then bleed heat off. I can take heat off the scale. All right, that's how heat works. There are things outside of just firing my weapons that can build up heat. Environmental factors, like I'm standing in lava, liquid hot magma, or weapons from enemies. So plasma weapons or flamers, right? Flamers are the big ones, right? They deal heat damage. Now, what I want to do is I want to bring up this Warhammer again and show you this tick. But actually, I'm going to bring up the card builder with the same Warhammer loaded. And what I did was I split the flamers out from this tick onto their own tick. So I took it was 2 small lasers, 2 flamers. Now it's 2 small lasers and then flamer. Okay. Each flamer does 1 plus H1. That means that when I fire this tick, I roll a hit. If I hit, I deal 1 damage, and the target picks up 1 point of heat. All right. That's resolved in the heat phase. Not in the combat phase, right? So like if my Warhammer acts before your Annihilator and I shoot you with both my flamers, you wouldn't have 2 points of heat until after you're done shooting and we go into the heat phase. Then you would take on those 2 points of heat. Okay? That's important because remember, shooting happens simultaneously in BattleTech. Even though there's an order, everything's kind of resolved at the end, like damage and all these things are resolved at the end of the phase. That's a core BattleTech concept. What's interesting is the way the ticks work. Like I could put these flamers on the same tick and it does 2 base, but it still only does 1 heat. Like that's a rounding thing. Like I'd have to stack a bunch of flamers to get that up to H2 because obviously it's a smaller heat scale and so on and so forth. But the pros and cons of stacking and grouping them in a tick. Pros, I roll once to hit. I deal 2 damage. That's kind of cool. Cons, I roll once, I can miss. I still only do 1 heat. If I split them out onto separate ticks, like it's cool. Like I can build up, I can have somebody build up 2 points of heat. So that pros and cons. It's just how the ticks are set up. And you can play with this in the builder to find what's my style. Maybe you just want to roll once and hit with a big chunk of damage, right? Like this card where it's 4 plus H1. Like you hit with all these short range weapons, and 4 is a significant amount of damage. It's like ER large laser territory. It's PPC levels of damage, right? And that's kind of nasty, right? You get all these junky little weapons and you put them together into a pretty serious pretty serious punch. Or you may say, hey, my mode is more along the lines of, I want to split these flamers out and try to generate as much heat on my target as possible. All right, little crash course on H weapons and ticks and things like that. But that's how H weapons work. All right, so back to the rules. All right, let's talk real quick about the heat levels before we move on. All right, so there are 5 and 0 as well. So a total of 6 levels. So we'll talk about, so 0 is no effect. You have no heat. Nothing happens, right? You can operate as normal. 1, you slow down a little bit. 2, you take a +1 ranged attack mod. Note, it's not physical, it's just ranged, and a +1 is bad, right? It makes that target number higher, harder to achieve. 3 is a shutdown. If you roll an 8 or better, okay, you avoid the shutdown. If it's a 7 or less, the mech shuts down. That's out of MechWarrior Destiny. I like it. It's simple. It's important to note that when mechs shut down, they don't automatically fall over. They don't have to make a PSR when they shut down. However, if they're forced to take a PSR while shut down, that's when they automatically fail. So if they're shut down and then the following turn they get walloped for a bunch of damage, and they have to make a PSR, they'll automatically fall down. But shutting down in and of itself does not trigger a PSR. It's a common question. The next heat level 4 is an ammo explosion. An 8 or better avoids it. 7 or less, boom. Remember, case still applies. If there are multiple ammo stores on board, you just roll randomly to determine which one. You'd say like, all right, I have 3 ammo stores. SRM is 1 and 2. This is 3 and 4. LRM is 5 and 6, whatever. So that's that. And then 5 is an automatic shutdown. Okay. So mechs don't track heat beyond 5. So if you build up, I don't know, you're a supernova and you fire all kinds of lasers and PPCs and stuff, and you build up 9 points of heat, like you don't track 9, you're at 5. Because when you shut down, the first thing that happens in the subsequent heat phase when you're shut down, you just remove all your heat. It wipes all. It doesn't matter how many sinks you have. You could have 1 heat sink. Doesn't matter. All your heat's gone. The mech's shut down. It's able to cool off. The other thing is you apply any new heat after that. So step 1, remove all the heat. Step 2, apply any new heat. And you're like, Aaron, what new heat? Again, you like that Warhammer could be standing outside your shut down mech, like pew pew pew, still shooting you with flamers, right? That could happen. You can still build up some heat. So an important note about external heat sources. Again, this is environmental or enemy weapons fire, right? Like flamers, plasmas. When you're shut down, the maximum heat you can build up from those sources, or really ever, is 2. So when you restart the following turn, which you do automatically, you will only ever have 2 points of heat on your scale. Even if they hit you with 3,000 flamers, you can only ever start with 2, because what we want to prevent from a game mechanics perspective is like flamer locking people in like perpetual shutdown, which is not fun. It's not like a fun game mechanic. Having 2 points of heat, don't forget, still really, really sucks. And you'll have a movement penalty, you have a gunnery penalty, you'll be in trouble. When you're active, meaning you're not shut down, you can take up to 3 points of heat from external sources. So when you're shut down, you're a little bit more efficient. Your engine's off, your fusion reactor's offline, your heat sinks are spinning, your fans are cooling, right? Your coolant's like pumping. You only take 2. Normally, you take 3. All right. Again, that's in the rules here. In this section, it articulates it pretty clearly. So that's heat. Heat phase is very simple. It's just basic math. There are some nuances of that we talk through, but largely it's pretty basic stuff. All right, let's talk about the end phase. So the end phase is pretty consistent in Alpha Strike and Classic. This is basically the administration phase. There are 3 main things that are happening: pilot and crew consciousness, Mechs are starting up if they were shut down for the turn, and then crippling damage and morale. This is a big one. Let's start with consciousness checks. All right, so let me bring up this Warhammer again, our poster child. So down here, you'll see there's a condition monitor. There's a little pilot helmet, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes. So every time a pilot takes damage, and this could be from like a survived ammo explosion, remember they take 2 boxes there. If they fall down, they take a box. If they take a head hit and survive it, they take a box, right? Every time they take a box, you mark one of these off. When that happens, every time you mark off a box or more boxes, you need to make a consciousness check in the end phase. So what is the last box you marked off? So like if I take my first hit, boom, I mark this box, I'm at a 3+, right? So if I take, let's say, 3 hits in a turn, which is unlikely, but let's say I have an ammo explosion and fall down. That could happen. So I'd mark off 1, 2, 3. I'd be at 7+. That would be my consciousness check number. I need to roll a 7 or better to remain conscious. If I roll a 6 or less, my pilot would black out. So when you black out, you basically lose a turn. However, you don't like when mechs, shut down, they automatically restart. When pilots black out, they don't automatically wake up. They have to retest consciousness at the same number, or if they take another head hit, or whatever, another pilot hit, whatever consciousness number they're at, they have to keep retesting. Let me jump back real quick, because the last thing is this KIA, it's killed in action. You get to the 6 box, your pilot's done. I don't think I've ever seen that happen in Override. I mean, I guess it's theoretically possible. But, maybe if you have ammo in the arms, you take two like ammo hits in the arms, and then, I don't know, you take a head hit and you fall over. I don't know. Could be a fun challenge. Well, so anyway, so that's pilot damage and pilot consciousness. All right. So the other thing is restarting. It's very simple. Units automatically restart in the end phase if they were shut down at the beginning of their turn. If you just shut down in the heat phase, you don't automatically restart in the end phase. You have to be shut down at the beginning of your turn, get to the end phase, and then you automatically restart. All right? Pretty simple. So the big one here is morale tests. So this is a combination of rules that are in the BattleTech manual and Alpha Strike Commander's Edition. They're all optional. They're like hidden and buried in random places. But there's rules on forced withdrawal. There's rules on morale. We always use them in our battle reports. They've just been sort of revised and cleaned up in Override. And so I'll talk a little bit about what happens. So let's talk about crippling damage to start. So a unit is considered crippled. A battle mech is considered crippled. A vehicle is considered crippled when the remaining torso or front armor, in the case of a vehicle, is 0. It means their armor is stripped and their structure is less than or equal to 4. There's no more like half rounded up of remaining. No, it's just like a flat number for all mechs. So if you're really big and you have a lot of structure, you're going to last longer. If you're a light mech and your armor's stripped, your front armor's stripped, it doesn't matter. Like, dude, I got one more shot and I'm toast, right? I got to get out of here, right? That's just the mindset where they've taken crippling damage, right? And so that's the notion there. All right, so let's talk about morale tests. So morale tests happen when a unit takes crippling damage for the first time, or anytime it takes damage after it is crippled. That could be to your left leg. It doesn't matter. If you take damage and you're crippled, you have to test morale. All right? Okay. So morale tests work as follows. There's a base target number of 8. The great thing about MechWarrior Destiny is everything's like 8+. Shutdown override, ammo explosions, critical hit confirmations, testing morale. And we picked the number for testing morale, just to be clear, but I made it an 8 because everything else is an 8. It makes it really easy to remember. It's modified by a few things. Number 1, do you have any weapons destroyed? If so, add 1. Right? Makes it harder. Do you have any other critical hits? Is your engine damaged, your gyro damaged, take motive hits? Do you have any ammo get blown up? ammo. I mean, if you did, like, weapons would be offline. So, okay, there's another +1. And then, are you well? Are you feeling okay? So any pilot hit is a +1, but that's cumulative, right? So if your pilot's taken 3 hits, that's a +3. He's not feeling great about his life, and he shouldn't be. There are also modifiers for things like commanding officers and non-coms and things like that. If they're on the field, they can modify morale. We'll talk about that as we get into the 5th video. But for now, basically, you're at an A+, and if, you modify it by how many criticals and how much damage you've taken. Now, if you're successful, your unit's rallied. They've stayed their nerves, and they can act entirely normally. They can move and shoot as normal. They're completely unconcerned. They're a mental fortress. If they fail, now this again, some of these rules have changed from maybe some older battle reports and things like that, but this is the way we're doing it. If they fail, they're broken, and it's called forced withdrawal. They have to move closer to their home edge by at least 1 full inch. That means you can make lateral moves and do sorts of weird things, or only just move straight back 1 inch. But you have to move 1 inch closer to your home edge. You don't need to sprint. You don't need to jump, unless that's the only way you can make 1 inch. Mechs that are basically have their gyros blown out and are crawling around, they can still move 1 inch, right? Mechs that are in forced withdrawal, right? So they're broken, they failed their morale check. They can still attack, they can still spot, but there's a +2 penalty, as they are very focused on withdrawing, right? They're very nervous. +2 is pretty significant. So it's like a gunnery 3 dude becomes gunnery 5. That's the difference between hitting and missing, unless you're at point blank. And in that case, they're kind of fighting for their life anyway, so it sort of makes sense. So that's kind of how forced withdrawal works. There are a couple important things that before we wrap up here. The first one is blackouts in morale. This is a funny rule. This is what I like to call the what just happened rule. If a pilot is blacked out, and they would have to take a morale check, they're assumed to automatically pass it, because by the time they wake up, like, the event has already happened, and they don't know. Like, either they've taken the damage and they were blacked out. So when they wake up, they automatically assume to pass. Now, remember, if they take additional damage, they'll have to retest, so that will happen. But if they were blacked out, they automatically pass morale. However, if they're shut down, they test as normal, because the pilot's still fully aware of what's going on. So they test as normal. And then there's this thing called auto ejection or auto abandonment for vehicles, right? Auto ejection for mechs. If they can't make that 1 inch happen, all right, they're immobilized and they're in forced withdrawal. They automatically eject. All right, it's just the way it is. Like, they're panicked. They're like, crap, I'm a sitting duck, and they pull the ripcord and they're out. And that's basically it. That's morale. So that's all there is to it. I think we hit on all the big stuff, and that's really the basics of gameplay. We've hit on all of the big stuff. So that's very good. There is a section, by the way, on advanced gameplay. We're not going to go into that, but there's rules for infantry, battle armor, transports, all the good stuff. It's all in here. So it's all there for you. Again, it's free to download. You can check those out, and it does reference some of those other books. But that's it. So a couple of things. Number one, Aries Games and Minis. Guys, don't forget to check it out. The books, the dice, the minis, everything you need to fulfill your BattleTech dreams and make your wildest BattleTech dreams come true. Well, probably not, because everybody wants to drive a mech around the city, but not going to do it, guys. It's not going to happen for another 1,000 years, but hang in there. It'll happen. But everything else, if you want tiny plastic miniature robots to drive around your tiny model city, Aries has all of that stuff for you, including game mats too, by the way. He's got some game mats on the site now. So lots of great stuff out there at Aries Games and Minis. Also, don't forget to subscribe, like, leave a comment. And if you want to get more involved in the channel, head on over to Patreon. Thanks to all of our amazing patrons for everything that you do, keeping the lights on, keeping the cameras rolling. Absolutely phenomenal stuff. So if you want to take your part in helping out the channel and keeping it going, again, head on over to Patreon. It's as little as $1 a month. That's all. So, and that's it. So stay tuned. A couple of things we've got coming up. Part 5, we're going to talk about force building and strike operations. We're going to talk about master unit list. We're going to talk about Mega Mech. That's a really exciting one. And just the steps on basically how to build a force. And then the last one, which will come out at the very, very tail end of this, will be a walkthrough tutorial, live demo, battle report of me playing against, I think we got Ben teed up for that one. So we're going to play through that. It'll be very, very fun. So that said, guys, thank you so much for watching. And of course, stay tuned. Always great stuff coming from Death from Above Wargaming. Have a great night.